Jared had been exploring the outer edges of the Andromeda sector for weeks, his ship drifting silently between stars. When he received a faint distress signal, it was weak, almost like a whisper in space. But something about it made him stop, curiosity and instinct pushing to follow the signal, and soon he found a small, rocky planet with a scarred surface. Smoke rose from deep craters, and the air shimmered with heat. Jared landed carefully, checking his suit and weapons. He had no idea what awaited him the moment he stepped out. He saw her, a figure lying on the ground, half buried in the dust. Her armor was torn, her skin a pale shade of green with streaks of silver. She was clearly not human, yet there was something familiar in her form. Her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, and her eyes flickered open briefly. She saw him, and for a moment Jared thought she might attack, but instead she seemed to study him, as if measuring who he was. Jared approached slowly, keeping his hands visible. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. The alien warrior, he would call her that, didn't speak. Instead, she reached out, her fingers trembling slightly. Something in her eyes told him she needed help, but there was also warning. He had no choice. He lifted her carefully, noticing how heavy she was, yet how her muscles twitched with power. Every movement she made felt calculated, precise. Even in pain, Jared managed to carry her to his ship, his heart racing. The engines roared to life, and the planet's surface began to blur behind them. He didn't know if he was saving a friend or inviting danger. Once inside the med bay, he set her down on the bed and activated the healing scanner. The device beeped rapidly, tried to analyze her alien biology. Her wounds were serious, but they were healing faster than any human injury could. Jared watched in awe as the bruises faded and the cuts sealed themselves. Her eyes remained on him, sharp and bright, studying, understanding, calculating. Hours passed, and she finally spoke, her voice low and melodic. "I am Kalara," she said, the word strange yet understandable. Jared blinked. "Kalara? Can you tell me what happened?" She shook her head slightly, pain crossing her features. Instead, she made a gesture, pointing to the stars and then to her chest. Jared realized she was wounded in battle, but the enemies were unknown. He wanted to ask more, but she closed her eyes, exhausted. That night, as Jared tried to sleep, he couldn't stop thinking about her. Her presence was magnetic, strange, and frightening all at once. He remembered her eyes, the way they seemed to pierce his thoughts, and the way her body tensed even in sleep, like a predator ready to strike. Something about her was more than human, more than alien. She carried a strength and a mystery he could not understand. Suddenly, alarms beeped, startling him. The scanner had detected a signal approaching the ship, fast and powerful. Jared's heart sank. "They found her," he whispered. Kalara stirred, her eyes opening wide, and for the first time, she spoke with urgency. "Hide or fight." Jared didn't need more instruction. He raced the control deck. The ship shuddered as an unidentified vessel appeared on the sensors. Its design was sharp, angular, and clearly built for war. Jared's fingers flew over the controls, activating shields and preparing weapons. Kalara moved beside him, her hands resting lightly on the console, and somehow he felt the power radiating from her. It was like she could influence the ship without touching it fully. For a moment, their eyes met, and Jared sensed something dangerous and thrilling. Kalara was alive, but she carried a warning, a challenge, and maybe a debt that he did not yet understand. The enemy ship drew closer, and Jared knew he had no choice but to run or fight, and deep down, he realized that rescuing her was only the beginning. Whatever lay ahead, it would change his life forever. As the stars blurred past the viewport, Jared stole one last glance at Kalara. Her gaze was fixed on him, steady, unyielding, and though she said nothing, her eyes promised a story that was only beginning. Jared felt the hum of the ship beneath his feet as he stared at Kalara. Her green and silver skin glowed faintly in the dim lights of the med bay, and every breath she took seemed deliberate, measured, like a predator waiting for its moment. He didn't know if he should trust her, yet something inside him whispered that she wasn't his enemy. But her eyes, those eyes never lied, and right now they were full of secrets. Kalara stirred on the bed, her limbs moving with uncanny precision, even weakened from her battle wounds. She carried herself with strength and grace. She studied the room, touching surfaces with careful movements, analyzing, memorizing. Jared watched in silence, feeling a mixture of fear and fascination. He had rescued her, yes, but he had no idea what he had truly brought aboard his ship. Hours passed in uneasy quiet. Jared tried to communicate, showing her simple symbols and speaking slowly. Kalara responded with gestures, tilt of her head, and occasional sharp glances. She seemed intelligent, aware, and possibly more cunning than any human he had met. Yet she didn't speak more than a few words. It was as if she was testing him, measuring him, weighing his worth. That evening, alarm sounded again. Softer this time. Jared checked the sensors carefully, noticing faint traces of energy. Other ships were near, but they weren't attacking yet. Kalara's eyes snapped open, her body tense. "They are close," she whispered, voice low and urgent. Jared felt a shiver run down his spine, realizing her words carried weight, not just a warning, but a promise of danger. Jared moved closer, trying to understand. "Kalara, what do they want?" he asked, keeping his voice calm. She hesitated, then pointed to herself, then to the stars. Jared understood enough. Her enemies were from her own world, and they were relentless. But there was more, something deeper, something she didn't want him to know yet. He decided to give her some freedom. Letting her explore the ship, Kalara walked slowly, almost floating above the floor. Her movements were mesmerizing, and Jared couldn't stop staring. Every step she took seemed intentional, as if she was mapping the ship in her mind. Then she stopped, touching a panel on the wall, and the lights flickered. Jared's jaw dropped. Her touch had interacted with the ship's systems, though he didn't know how. It was clear she was not an ordinary alien. Suddenly, Kalara froze, listening. Jared turned, and his heart skipped a beat when he saw her eyes narrow. Her gaze was sharp, alert, almost predatory. "Someone is here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Before Jared could respond, a flash of light appeared outside the viewport. A sleek ship darted past them, moving faster than anything he had ever seen. Jared realized they had been followed, but the strange thing was the ship didn't attack yet. Kalara stood by the window, her hands pressed against the glass. Jared felt her energy, a strange aura of power that seemed to pulse around her. She whispered again, this time in a language he didn't understand, but the words carried weight, urgency, almost like a spell. The ship outside slowed slightly, as if reacting to her presence. Jared swallowed hard, realizing she was not just a warrior. She might be more powerful than he could imagine. The next day, Jared tried to learn more about her. He brought data pads and showed her holographic images of planets, stars, and creatures. Kalara watched carefully, sometimes pointing to certain images, sometimes shaking her head. When she pointed to a planet far away, Jared felt a chill run down his spine. There was something in her gesture that said, "This is my world, and danger is coming from there." He asked questions, but she only looked at him, her eyes intense and unreadable. As night fell, Jared couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Kalara, her strength, her intelligence, her mystery. And then it happened. He heard a whisper in his mind, soft and melodic at first. He thought he was imagining it, but then the words came clearer. "Do not leave me alone." Jared froze, realizing she was somehow communicating directly with him, not through words, not through gestures, but through thought. He rushed to her med bay, and she was sitting up, looking at him with those intense eyes. "Did you speak to me?" he asked, voice trembling slightly. Kalara nodded slowly. A small smile appeared on her lips. "You saved me." "I owe you," she said in his mind this time, "and I will not forget." Jared stepped back, suddenly aware of the danger he had invited. This was no ordinary alien, and her debt could be more than he wanted. But before he could react, alarm screamed again. Another ship had appeared, moving dangerously close. Kalara's body tensed, and for the first time, she spoke aloud, her voice commanding, "They are here to take me. You must help me fight." Jared barely had time to prepare. Weapons armed, shields up, he stood beside her. Kalara's eyes glowed faintly as she raised her hand, and for a moment he felt a strange force ripple through the ship. The enemy vessel hesitated. As if sensing her power, Jared realized that saving her was not just an act of mercy. It was a decision that could cost his life, and yet he couldn't turn back. As the two of them faced the approaching danger, Jared felt a strange bond forming, not friendship, not trust, something more complicated, more dangerous. Kalara looked at him, her expression unreadable, and he understood one thing clearly. He had saved her, yes, But in doing so, he had entered a world of danger, power, and secrets far beyond his understanding, and the adventure, it seemed, was only beginning. Jared had spent 3 days aboard his ship since rescuing Kalara. Each day brought new revelations and new unease. He had begun to understand her movements, her gestures, her strange, silent ways of communicating. Yet every answer seemed to lead to more questions. Kalara's presence was magnetic, powerful, and unsettling all at once. That morning, the ship's alarms had fallen silent, giving them a temporary sense of peace. Kalara moved through the ship with precision, her silver-green skin glinting in the soft lights. Jared observed her from a distance, tried to act casual, but he couldn't stop noticing the way she analyzed everything. Each instrument, each panel, each control seemed to respond to her touch. It was as if the ship itself recognized her presence, obeyed her silently. Jared finally approached her, holding a small tray of food. Kalara looked up, her eyes curious but cautious. He placed the tray down and sat near her, keeping a respectful distance. "Kalara, do you trust me?" he asked softly. She tilted her head, her expression unreadable, then placed a hand lightly on the table, palm down. For a moment, Jared thought she was closing herself off, but then he felt something strange, a warmth, a pulse, a silent acknowledgement that she understood him. Hours passed, and they began to communicate more easily. She touched images of Earth on a holographic display, her fingers tracing continents, oceans, cities. Her eyes lingered on children playing, families together, simple human connections. Jared noticed a reaction, an almost wistful sadness. It was the first hint that beneath her warrior exterior, Kalara had a softer, vulnerable side, something Jared hadn't expected, and something that unsettled him deeply. That night, as Jared tried to sleep in the small cabin adjacent to the medbay, he heard whispers again, soft, melodic, but urgent. "Do you feel it?" Jared froze, realizing the voice came not from the speakers, not from the air, but from his own mind. He blinked, then recognized the voice. It was Kalara's. She was speaking directly to him, bridging the gap between mind and thought. "Feel what?" he whispered back, unsure what he was truly saying. "The bond, the connection. It is stronger than you know," she said. Jared felt a chill, a strange current flowing through him, as if unseen threads tied their fates together. He got up and found her sitting in the observation deck, staring at the stars. The vastness of space spread before him like a dark ocean, endless and mysterious. Kalara turned her gaze to him, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "You are different," she said aloud this time, voice low and intense. "Humans, most are weak, uncertain, but you are not." Jared swallowed hard, unsure whether to be flattered or afraid. Her words carried a weight, an unspoken promise, and perhaps a warning. Suddenly, the ship trembled, small at first, then violently. Jared grabbed the console as lights flickered, alarms screaming. Kalara moved swiftly, hands outstretched, her energy radiating. A burst of unseen force rippled through the deck, and the tremor stopped. Jared's heart raced, realizing she had saved him without touching the ship's controls. "Your power, what are you?" he asked, voice trembling. Kalara's gaze was steady, unflinching. "I am what my world made me," she said softly, "and what I choose to be." The moment passed, but the unease lingered. Jared couldn't stop thinking about her words, her power, and the strange pulse he had felt in his mind. He realized this bond was more than chance, more than gratitude. It was something ancient, something tied to her very existence. And as he pondered this, Kalara suddenly spoke, voice sharp, almost commanding. "You cannot leave me, Jared, not now." He stepped back, startled. "I'm not leaving you, but why must I stay?" Her eyes locked onto his, intense and unwavering. "Because fate brought us together, and because there's a cost for saving me." Jared didn't understand, but fear prickled at the edges of his mind. He had rescued her, yes, but it seemed that act had tied him to her destiny. Kalara leaned closer, her hand hovering near his arm. "You will learn soon enough. The price is not negotiable," she said. Her voice was soft but carried an unshakable certainty. Jared felt a shiver, a mixture of fear and fascination. He didn't know whether to step back or reach out. The next day, Kalara guided him to a small chamber in the lower decks, hidden beneath storage and systems. Inside were markings, alien runes that glowed faintly as she approached. "This is my world," she said, her voice almost reverent. Jared studied the runes, trying to understand, but they made no sense to him. She began a silent ritual, moving gracefully among the symbols, and he felt a strange hum in the air. It was as if the room itself was alive, responding to her presence, Jared's. Curiosity battled with fear. He wanted to understand, but every instinct screamed danger. Then Kalara paused and looked directly at him. Her eyes glinted with an almost mischievous intensity. "You'll be part of this, whether you wish to or not," she said. Jared's heart skipped a beat, the words heavy with meaning he couldn't yet grasp. She leaned closer, her breath brushing his cheek, and whispered, "You saved me, and now I choose you." The statement sent a shock through him, confusion, fear, and an unexpected thrill all at once. Jared realized that this connection was deeper than he had imagined, dangerous, thrilling, and irreversible. Just then, the ship shuddered again, more violently this time. The sensors picked up multiple vessels approaching. Larger than the first, Kalara straightened, her expression deadly. "They have found me," she said, voice low but commanding. Jared grabbed his weapons, preparing for the unknown. Kalara's eyes softened for a brief moment, almost human in their vulnerability. But then they hardened again, a warrior ready to fight. And Jared knew that the battle was not just against enemies outside, but against forces far larger than himself. As they stood together, side by side, Kalara's energy pulsed faintly, surrounding them in a protective aura. Jared felt like a tether, a connection stronger than anything he'd ever known. It was terrifying and comforting all at once. He realized then that saving her had not only altered her fate, but his own, and that whatever lay ahead, he was inextricably bound to Kalara, through battle, through danger, and through a bond that he could neither break nor fully understand. The stars outside seemed to pulse with anticipation, as if the universe itself knew what was coming. Jared looked at Kalara, her eyes shining with unspoken promises and threats, and he understood one truth clearly. The story was far from over. It had only just begun. The hum of the ship's engines had never sounded more ominous. Jared stood on the control deck, gripping the rail as sensors blared warnings. Multiple vessels, larger and more menacing than any he had seen, surrounded them. Kalara moved beside him, calm but alert, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Jared tried to read her expression, but there was none of the vulnerability he had seen before, only sharp, predatory focus. "They've found me," she said, voice low, almost deadly. "Who are they?" Jared asked, heart racing. Kalara's gaze flicked to him, a warning in her eyes. "They are my people, my enemies, and they will not stop until I am returned or destroyed," she said. Jared's mind spun. She was being hunted by her own kind. But why? And why now? Before he could ask more, the first vessel struck. Energy beams cut through the void, illuminating the ship in bursts of blue and white. Jared dove for cover as alarm screamed. Kalara's hand hovered over the console, and a pulse of energy emanated from her. The beams faltered, twisting and splitting midair. Jared realized with awe and fear that she was controlling the attack, bending it with her will. Her powers were terrifying and magnificent all at once. The ship shook violently as another vessel tried to ram them. Kalara's eyes narrowed, and she moved with incredible speed, activating systems Jared didn't even know existed. The enemy ship was thrown off balance, spinning as if caught in an invisible trap. Jared could hardly comprehend what he was seeing. Her abilities were beyond human understanding. Yet every move she made was precise, calculated, deadly. Amidst the chaos, a sharp warning flashed across the console. Sensors detected boarding pods, small, fast ships attempting to land on theirs. Jared grabbed his weapon, ready for anything. Kalara stood beside him, silent, her aura pulsing with power. The pod struck the hull, shaking the ship like thunder. Jared fired, but it seemed almost useless compared to her power. Kalara raised her hand, and a shockwave rippled through the deck, throwing intruders back into space. Jared's jaw dropped. Her power was not just strength, it was control over matter itself. After the first wave, silence fell, broken only by the ship's alarms and the steady pulse of Kalara's energy. Jared could barely speak, his mind racing. Why are they after you?" he asked, voice trembling. Kalara turned, her gaze intense. "They fear me, my abilities, and the prophecy," she said. Jared blinked. "Prophecy? You mean there's something bigger than this fight?" he asked. She nodded slowly, eyes distant. "They believe I was chosen for something only I can do," she said, voice low, almost regretful. Jared felt a chill run down his spine. realizing he had been pulled into a conflict far larger than he could imagine. As they prepared for the next wave of attacks, Kalara leaned closer, her voice sharp, almost a whisper in his ear. "You cannot leave me, Jared, not now. If they capture me, everything we know will be destroyed." Jared felt the weight of her words, her intensity, her absolute certainty. He wanted to argue, to say he would fight alongside her, but remain cautious. But the truth was clear. He was no longer just a rescuer. He was part of her fate, bound to her in ways he did not yet understand. Suddenly, the ship lurched violently, throwing Jared off balance. Kalara caught him with ease, her grip firm but not harsh. "Stay close," she commanded, voice steady. Jared followed instinctively, tried to keep pace with her movements. They moved to the weapons deck, where Kalara activated consoles with gestures that made his head spin. Energy shields shimmered around the ship, forming protective layers he could barely comprehend. The boarding pod struck again, smaller and faster this time. Jared fired at them, but Kalara raised her hands, and a pulse of energy sent them tumbling into void. The entire deck shook as her power surged. Jared could see her strain, feel the energy radiating from her, and yet she never faltered, never hesitated. It was like watching a force of nature, terrifying, unstoppable, beautiful. After the battle, silence fell again, and the ship floated in the void, scarred but intact. Jared leaned against the console, trying to catch his breath. Kalara moved beside him, her eyes scanning the stars, still alert. "They will return," she said simply, voice calm but certain. Jared shivered. He realized there was no escape from this conflict, no moment of rest. Her enemies were relentless, and her abilities made her a target far deadlier than he could imagine. As night fell in the ship's artificial cycle, Jared tried to sleep, but his mind would not rest. Images of Kalara's power, the ships, the attacks, the prophecy, they haunted him, and then a whisper again, soft, urgent, in his mind. "Do not doubt me. Do not leave me, or all will be lost." He froze, realizing that her influence reached beyond the physical, into the mind, into his thoughts. It was both comforting and frightening. He could not ignore it, and he could not resist it. The next morning, Kalara brought him to the observation deck, pointing to distant vessels in the void. "They are gathering forces. Larger fleets are coming," she said, voice low. Jared squinted at the ships, noting their sheer numbers, the deadly precision of their formation. He realized then that this battle was far from over, and he was already entangled in a war that spanned galaxies. Kalara looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You cannot leave," she said, her eyes locking onto his. "I have chosen you, whether you like it or not." Jared's mind raced, fear and fascination clashing. He had saved her, yes, but now he understood. Saving her was only the beginning. The danger, the mystery, the power, and her claim on him were far from over. As they prepared for the coming attacks, Jared realized one terrifying truth. Kalara was not just a warrior, not just an alien, not just someone he had rescued. She was a force of destiny, and he was trapped in it. There was no turning back, no escape, only the unknown path ahead, and the universe seemed to pulse with anticipation, waiting to see what would happen next. The void outside the ship stretched endlessly, stars blinking faintly in the distance. Inside, Jared moved through the corridors like a man half awake, haunted by the events of the past days, the battles, the energy pulses, Kalara's strange whispers in his mind. They all weighed on him. He had thought rescuing her would be a simple act of mercy, a heroic choice. Now he realized it had been anything but simple. Kalara waited for him in the observation chamber, her figure bathed in the soft glow of distant stars. Her green and silver skin shimmered faintly, reflecting the lights. Jared froze at the sight of her, sensing that something had changed. There was a new intensity in her eyes, sharper, deeper, almost predatory. "You are awake," she said softly, voice low, but carrying authority. Jared nodded, unsure if he wanted to speak or run. She gestured for him to sit, and he obeyed, though every instinct screamed caution. "I saved you, Kalara," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, "and I will continue to protect you. But I need to understand you, understand the situation." Kalara's eyes glinted, almost amused. "You have saved me. Yes, but that means nothing without the bond that comes next," she said. Jared frowned, not understanding. "The bond?" he asked cautiously. Kalara leaned closer, her voice soft but intense. "The bond of life. she said simply, and for a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Jared stared, unable to comprehend. Kalara's next words hit him like a shockwave. "I want your child," she said, eyes locking onto his. Jared's heart skipped a beat, disbelief and fear flooding him. What do you mean?" he stammered. "I cannot explain it fully, not in your language, but it is necessary," she continued. "Your child must be mine to continue my line, to fulfill what my world demands." Jared felt the room tilt slightly, his mind spinning. This was no ordinary request. No. Simple favor. It was a demand, a claim, a threat disguised as desire. He stood abruptly, pacing, trying to gather his thoughts. "This is insane. I saved you. I risked everything. And now you demand this from me?" he said, voice rising. Kalara's eyes softened for a moment, almost human in their vulnerability. "I do not ask lightly," she said, voice trembling slightly. "I would not choose this path if it were not necessary for both of us, for my people, for the future." Jared clenched his fists, torn between anger and fascination. He realized he could not simply refuse her, not without consequences far beyond his understanding. Days passed in tense silence, the ship moving to the void. Jared tried to avoid her, tried to keep his distance, but Kalara was always near, her presence unavoidable, her aura pressing against him like a tide. She communicated through thought again, soft words in his mind, weaving a connection he could neither resist nor ignore. "You saved me, now you must not turn away," she whispered. Jared shivered, the words threading through him like invisible chains. He wanted to argue, to escape, but a part of him, a dangerous, irrational part, wondered what it would be like to surrender. One evening, Kalara took him to the ship's med bay. She moved with a fluid grace, her eyes glowing faintly. "This is where it begins," she said, gesturing to an alien device. Humming with energy, Jared stepped back, alarmed. "Begins? What is this?" Kalara's gaze was steady, unwavering. "It is part of the bond, the ritual that ties you to me, that allows life to continue," she said. Jared felt his pulse race, dread creeping in. He had no idea how to respond, and yet the pull of her presence was undeniable. Kalara approached, her hands hovering near his chest, energy rippling faintly around her fingers. "You cannot refuse entirely," she said softly. Her words carried a weight, a power, a threat subtle but real. Jared felt it in his mind, in his body, in the very air between them. He wanted to step back, to say no, but fear and fascination froze him. Her eyes held him, unrelenting, commanding. "You are mine for this purpose," she said, her voice melodic but final. Jared's thoughts spun, memories of Earth, of his life, of the battles they had fought together, clashing with the impossible demands she placed before him. He realized that this was no ordinary alien. Kalara's needs, her destiny, her power, were intertwined with his own life in ways he could not escape. And yet, beneath the fear, a strange curiosity bloomed. He did not understand it fully, but he could not ignore it. That night, Jared sat alone in the observation deck, staring at the stars. Kalara's presence was near, quiet but insistent, a pulse in his mind he could not deny. He thought about her words, her request, the bond she spoke of. He realized he had entered a world of rules and power far beyond his own, and that resisting her completely might not be an option. But neither could he give in without understanding the full consequences. Kalara approached silently, sitting beside him, her aura pressing gently against his thoughts. "Do you understand now?" she asked softly, her voice carrying across the mind link. Jared hesitated, swallowing hard. I think I understand, but I do not know if I can accept it," he admitted. Kalara's gaze softened, almost imperceptibly. "I do not expect you to accept blindly," she said. "But the bond, the child, it is not only my choice, Jared." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. "It is destiny and fate." Jared realized then that the fight, the battles, the danger outside the ship were nothing compared to the battle unfolded within him. Kalara's presence, her claim, her bond, they challenged everything he knew about freedom, about choice, about life. And yet he could not walk away. The connection was too strong, the danger too immediate, the future too uncertain. He was trapped, entangled, caught between fear, fascination, and a strange, undeniable pull toward her. As the ship drifted to the void, lights dimmed, engines humming softly, Jared and Kalara sat together, silent, tense, their thoughts and minds brushing against one another. The universe outside seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next move, the next choice. And Jared knew one thing with absolute clarity. His life, his fate, and perhaps his very soul had been forever altered the moment he saved her. There was no going back, no retreat, only the unknown path ahead, and the shocking, impossible request she had placed before him was only the beginning. Jared paced the corridors of the ship, his mind racing. Every shadow, every hum of the engines felt heavier, darker, as if the ship itself knew the tension between him and Kalara. He had tried to sleep, tried to reason with himself, tried to push away the pull she had over him, but it was impossible. Kalara's presence lingered like a shadow, pressing against his thoughts, and he felt trapped in a web he could not escape. He stopped at the observation deck, staring at the void. The stars blinked cold and distant. Indifferent to chaos inside the ship, Jared's hand brushed against the console, feeling the vibrations of the engines beneath him. He thought about Kalara's words, her demands, her whispers in his mind. He wanted freedom, space to think, to breathe, to make his own choice. But the more he tried to resist, the stronger the pull seemed to grow. It was as if she had already claimed a part of him. Unseen, unshakable. Suddenly, he felt it. A shift in the air, subtle but undeniable. Kalara was near, moving silently, her eyes glowing faintly. "Jared," she said softly, her voice carrying his mind, melodic and commanding at once. "I know your thoughts, your doubts, your fear." Jared clenched his fists, trying to keep his composure. "I will not be controlled," he said aloud, though his voice wavered. Kalara's eyes softened for a moment, almost imperceptibly. "But you are already part of this, whether you resist or not," she said. Jared felt a shiver run down his spine, the truth in her words undeniable. He turned and ran, heading for the lower decks. The corridors twisted and hummed with the ship's energy. Jared's mind raced as alarms blared, warning of approaching ships. He tried to focus on the danger outside, using it as an excuse to avoid the danger inside, Kalara, but it was impossible to ignore her presence. It followed him, pressing against his thoughts like a tide, relentless and insistent. Kalara appeared suddenly at the intersection of two corridors, her figure bathed in soft green light. "Jared, stop," she said, voice calm but filled with authority. He skidded to a halt, heart pounding. I need space," he said, struggling to breathe. Her gaze softened briefly, but then hardened. "You cannot hide, not from me, not from what binds us," she said. Before he could react, her hand lifted slightly, and the air around him seemed to thrum with invisible energy. Jared felt it like a weight pressing against him, rooting him to the spot. He stumbled, nearly falling, powerless against the invisible force. Kalara stepped closer, her green-silver skin glowing faintly. "You are mine for this bond," she said. Jared's mind screamed for him to resist, to fight, to run. But each attempt met resistance, subtle but overwhelming. It was not just physical, not just mental. It was something deeper, more primal. Her power reached into him, threading through his thoughts, his instincts, his very will, and though he fought, he could not break free. Desperate, Jared lunged toward the weapons deck, hoping to arm himself. Kalara followed effortlessly, moving like a predator, her energy rippling with every step. He activated the ship's defenses, raising shields and weapons, but Kalara's presence disrupted the systems, bending the controls, neutralizing the defenses. He realized then that this was no ordinary confrontation. Her power surpassed anything he had faced, and yet he could not hate her entirely, not when there was also fascination, fear, and something else he did not dare name. The ship shuddered violently as enemy vessels appeared on the sensors, closing in fast. Kalara's eyes narrowed, and she raised her hands, releasing a wave of energy that sent the approaching ship spiraling away. Jared watched, awe and fear mixing. She moved with precision, power flowing from her like a river of light. Every strike was deliberate, calculated, and terrifying. The battle outside mirrored the struggle within. Power, control, and survival. After the attack, the ship drifted in eerie silence, shields flickering, engines humming. Jared leaned against the console, catching his breath. Kalara approached slowly, her steps silent, deliberate. "You cannot leave, Jared," she said softly, almost pleading. "I know you resist, but fate does not allow it." He stared at her, conflicted, anger and fear battling with the pull he felt toward her. "You are relentless," he said, voice shaking. "And so are you," Kalara replied, a faint smile. Tugging at her lips, her gaze held him, unyielding, impossible to ignore. That night, Jared tried to escape again, moving toward the cargo bay, hoping to hide, but Kalara's presence was everywhere, subtle yet undeniable. He could feel it in the hum of the ship, in the air, in his mind. "You cannot run from what is already yours," she whispered in his thoughts. Jared stopped, panic rising, realizing that this was no ordinary chase. Her influence was total, absolute, yet strangely gentle. It terrified him, and yet it drew him in, threading through him in ways he could not resist. Kalara finally appeared before him in the cargo bay, her hands raised, energy rippling faintly. "You feel it, don't you?" she asked softly. Jared swallowed hard, unable to respond. "The bond, the connection, it grows with every thought, every act, every moment," she said. Her eyes searched his, unflinching, demanding. Jared realized that this was not just desire. It was a force, an inevitability. He wanted to resist, to flee, to fight, but the truth was undeniable. He could not escape the pull. She had over him. Suddenly, alarms blared again, and the sensors detected multiple enemy ships closing in, faster and more deadly than before. Jared and Kalara moved to control deck, side by side, their unspoken bond strengthening, weapons armed, shields raised. They prepared for the oncoming battle, Kalara's aura pulsed around them, protective and powerful. Jared realized then that he had no choice. He was bound to her, to the fight, to the destiny she had claimed for him, and though fear coursed through him, he also felt a strange, thrilling certainty. He was not alone. Together, they would face the storm, whether he wanted it or not. As the enemy fleet approached, engines roaring, weapons primed, Jared glanced at Kalara. Her gaze met his, unyielding, unwavering, and full of promise, threat, and power. He understood one terrifying truth. Resistance was futile, yet surrender was equally dangerous. The battle ahead would test not only their strength, but the connection that bound them. And deep down, Jared knew that the universe itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see the outcome. The path forward was uncertain, fraught with danger, and impossible to escape. But for better or worse, he was already entwined in Kalara's world, her power, and her destiny. The stars outside the ship stretched endlessly. Cold and indifferent, Jared stood at the control deck, his hands gripping the railing, knuckles white. The enemy fleet loomed large on the sensors, dozens of ships bristling with weapons. Kalara stood beside him, calm, glowing faintly with energy that pulsed like a heartbeat. Her eyes held something Jared had never seen before, determination, power, and a vulnerability buried deep beneath the surface. "You ready?" she asked, voice soft but commanding. Jared swallowed hard, trying to steady his racing heart. I don't know if I'm ready," he admitted. Kalara's gaze softened briefly, almost imperceptibly. "You don't need to be ready," she said. "You only need to survive and trust me." Jared's mind spun. He wanted to argue, to resist, but he felt the invisible pull she had over him. It was stronger than any weapon, any fear, any thought of freedom. The enemy fleet surged closer, energy beams cutting through space. Kalara raised her hands, and the ship trembled, responding to her power. Shields flared, weapons charged, and the first wave of attacks struck. Jared fired where he could, but it was Kalara who dominated the battle. Her energy pulsed through the ship, deflecting beams, disabling enemy systems. She moved with precision and grace, a warrior and a force of nature all at once. Amid the chaos, Kalara spoke, her voice soft but carrying in his mind. "Jared, now comes your choice." Jared's heart skipped a beat, confusion and fear intertwining. "Choice? What do you mean?" he whispered. Kalara's eyes met his, glowing faintly. "You saved me. Now the bond can be completed or it can end," she said. "The child, the destiny, it is your decision as much as mine." Jared felt his pulse hammer in his chest. He realized then that this was no ordinary battle. It was personal, intimate, and terrifying. He thought of his life on Earth, his freedom, his choices, and he thought of Kalara, the warrior he had saved, the alien whose presence dominated his mind and body. He realized that rejecting her completely could have consequences far beyond his understanding. Yet surrendering fully felt just as impossible, dangerous, unknown. Jared's mind raced, fear and fascination battling in equal measure. Suddenly, A massive energy surge rocked the ship, alarms blaring. The enemy fleet had coordinated a full assault, their beams striking the hull with devastating force. Jared grabbed the console, bracing himself. Kalara raised her hands, energy rippling outward, the ship trembling under the sheer force. For a moment, Jared could see her struggle, her energy straining against the weight of her powers. And then she turned to him, eyes glowing brighter than ever. "Now," she said, voice soft but urgent. Jared took a deep breath, stepping toward her, heart pounding. He felt the pull of her presence, the invisible threads tying their fates together, and for the first time, he stopped resisting, not because he surrendered entirely, but because he understood that some forces could not be fought. They could only be faced together. Kalara's hands moved gracefully, energy swirling between them. The ship trembled as the enemy fleet faltered under her power. Jared felt a strained connection strengthen, a pulse that went beyond mind, body, and thought. It was as if their lives, their destinies, were intertwined in ways that defied logic, and in that moment, he made his choice. Not a surrender, not a refusal, but commitment to face the unknown with her. The bond was sealed in ways Jared could not explain. Kalara's energy enveloped him, connecting their minds, their hearts, their very essence. He felt her history, her struggles, her pain, and her desires, and she felt his courage, his fear, his humanity. The connection was overwhelming, terrifying, and exhilarating all at once. The enemy fleet surged one final time. Larger than before, Kalara and Jared stood together at the control deck, the pulse of her power shielding them. The battle was brutal, beams of energy slicing through space, explosions rocking the ship, and then, with a final surge of combined will, Kalara unleashed a force so immense it disabled the entire enemy formation. The fleet scattered, retreating into the void. The ship trembled, systems sparking. But they had survived. Jared stared her in awe, fear still coursing through him. But beneath it all, a strange calm settled, as if the universe itself had acknowledged their bond. After the battle, silence fell over the ship, broken only by the faint hum of the engines. Kalara turned to him, her gaze soft now, almost human. "You chose wisely," she said. Jared exhaled slowly, realizing the weight of the moment. He had faced not only enemies in space, but also the impossible demands of destiny, and he had survived not by fighting alone, but by accepting the connection that had been inevitable all along. In the quiet, Kalara reached out, her hand brushing his, energy faintly pulsating. "You are part of me now, and I part of you," she whispered. Jared felt the truth in her words, a mixture of fear, awe, and something deeper, a strange exhilaration, a bond that defied explanation. He realized that the child she had asked for was not just about lineage, not just about destiny. It was about connection, survival, and the intertwining of two lives across galaxies. Days passed in silence, the ship repairing itself, systems humming back to life. Jared and Kalara worked together, side by side, a team forged not only by battle but by choice. The bond remained, invisible but undeniable, pulsing beneath the surface. Jared no longer fought it. He understood that some forces were larger than fear, larger than resistance. They were forces of destiny, and he had embraced them cautiously, yet willingly. One night, Kalara brought him to the observation deck, stars stretching infinitely before them. "You see," she said softly, voice melodic, "this is only the beginning." Jared looked at her, feeling the weight and truth of her words. The universe was vast, full of danger, mystery, and forces they could barely comprehend. And yet he knew that whatever came next, he would face it with her, bound together by power, fate, and the bond that could not be broken. Kalara's hand brushed his, and for the first time he felt a strange peace, not comfort, not safety, but certainty. Certainty that they were together, that they had survived, that they had chosen their path. And as the stars shimmered outside, Jared realized one final truth. Terrifying and beautiful. Life, destiny, and love were forces that could not be resisted, and he had surrendered. Not to Kalara, not to fate, but to the reality that some bonds could never be broken. The ship drifted to the void, engines humming, systems repaired, stars stretching endlessly ahead. Jared and Kalara stood together, side by side, a warrior and her rescuer, bonded in ways neither fully understood. And though the universe was vast, dangerous, and unknown, they knew one thing for certain. Together, they were unstoppable, and the story of their lives was only just beginning.